In today's church, the pressure is not coming from diplomatic halls or academic conferences. It is rising from ordinary Catholics who feel that something essential is slipping away. They are not organizing revolutions. They are writing letters. They are asking questions. And more of those questions are being directed straight to Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, the prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. The tone of these appeals is serious, sometimes stern, often wounded. The people writing them speak of justice and transparency. They speak about clarity in matters that touch the core of belief. They describe a fracture that, in their view, is no longer subtle. It is visible. It is discussed openly in parishes, online forums, and private conversations. Many feel that the gap between the Church's leadership and parts of its faithful has widened in recent decades, and they want to understand why. To grasp their concern, one has to look back at a long process that did not happen overnight. Over the past 60 years, the Church has tried to engage the modern world in new ways. After the Second Vatican Council, a new language emerged: dialogue, openness, reading the signs of the times. For many, this was necessary and hopeful. For others, it gradually became something else. They argue that what began as engagement slowly turned into absorption. Instead of offering a distinct voice to the world, the Church, in their view, began adopting the world's categories and priorities. If you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos like this, because what you're about to hear is not just news, it's a wake-up call for every heart that still believes truth should burn brighter than silence. Now grab your rosary, quiet your spirit, and let your heart listen, not just with ears, but with faith. This criticism centers on secularization within the Church itself. Not secularization in the sense of empty pews or declining vocations, but something more internal. A shift in tone. A change in emphasis. A tendency, critics say, to frame theological questions in sociological terms. Over time, this has produced tensions that are no longer limited to liturgical preferences or disciplinary rules. The dispute runs deeper. It touches the relationship between revealed truth and historical change. Between doctrine and consensus. Between fidelity and adaptation. These tensions are especially visible in the uneasy relationship between Rome and sectors of traditional Catholicism. Many believers who describe themselves as attached to perennial doctrine feel that church governance has become fluid and sometimes ambiguous. They are not necessarily rejecting authority. In fact, many insist they are defending it. But they question how that authority is being exercised. A key moment often cited in this broader transformation is the gesture of Paul VI when he set aside the papal tiara and later addressed the United Nations, expressing a desire for the Church to place itself at the service of the world. At the time, it was seen as a powerful sign of humility and outreach. Decades later, some look back on it as symbolic of a deeper shift in self-understanding. They argue that the language of service gradually blurred into a language of alignment. That perception intensified during the global crisis between 2020 and 2022. Across much of the world, governments imposed strict measures in response to a health emergency. The Church, in most places, followed those directives closely. Churches were closed. Public masses were suspended. Access to the sacraments was limited. The justification was the common good and public safety. For many Catholics, this period was deeply unsettling. For the first time in living memory, the Eucharist seemed to be treated as non-essential. Administrative decrees determined who could enter a church and when. Confessionals were empty. Baptisms were postponed. Funerals were reduced to brief, restricted ceremonies. Even those who accepted the health measures as prudent could not ignore the emotional and spiritual shock of it. The memory that lingers for critics is not simply that precautions were taken. It is the sense that the hierarchy appeared quicker to comply with civil authority than to defend sacramental life. The accusation, whether fair or not, is that Caesar's voice carried more weight than the Church's own sacramental urgency. It is in this atmosphere that a letter emerged from a layman, Salvatore Scalia, addressed directly to Cardinal Fernandez. The letter was circulated by independent Catholic outlets and quickly became a point of discussion. It was not written in the language of rage. It was measured. But it was firm. The author began by referring to an address in which Cardinal Fernandez had called for intellectual humility, invoking the example of saints. The letter's central criticism was not about the saints themselves but about what was left unsaid. According to the writer, the appeal to humility seemed selective because it avoided addressing a defining event of recent church history, the management of the global health crisis. The letter contrasted the relative silence on certain theological controversies with the strong public statements that encouraged specific health decisions, presented at times as moral responsibilities and even acts of charity. Official messages and symbolic initiatives were cited. The concern was about priorities. Why, the writer asked, was there decisive clarity on matters outside the traditional core of doctrinal teaching, while long-standing theological questions remained unanswered? Here the debate reached back to earlier unresolved issues, including dubia submitted in 2016 and the filial correction that followed in 2017. For critics, these episodes symbolize a pattern. Questions are raised formally. They are discussed widely. But no direct answers come. The impression left behind is of a church that speaks often but responds selectively. This pattern, in the eyes of the letter's author, fits into a broader trajectory of gradual secularization. Not a dramatic break, but a slow shift in language. Words once precise now appear elastic. Documents open doors without defining their limits. Each new text generates not only pastoral guidance but fresh uncertainty. A recent example frequently mentioned in this context is Fiducia Supplicans. Its release triggered strong reactions in various parts of the world, including explicit resistance from entire episcopal conferences. Supporters described it as a pastoral gesture. Critics described it as another instance of ambiguity. The division itself became evidence, for some, that something fundamental was unsettled. Other symbolic moments are cited as well, including interreligious gestures and the Abu Dhabi document's reference to religious plurality within divine providence. Critics argue that presenting the existence of multiple religions as part of God's will risks weakening the central claim of Christianity about the uniqueness of Christ. Defenders respond that such language speaks of permissive will and peaceful coexistence. The dispute, however, reveals how differently these texts are read. At the center of all this stands the question of authority and trust. In many official circles, dissent is sometimes attributed to misunderstanding or lack of theological formation. The letter challenges that assumption. It points out that not only lay people but theologians, bishops, and cardinals have sought clarification on certain issues. When answers do not come, frustration grows. The author insists that the motivation is not rebellion. It is preservation. Those who speak up, he argues, do so because they believe something essential is endangered. They are not seeking influence or power. They are seeking coherence between what the Church has always taught and what it now appears to suggest. The final tone of the letter is sober. It predicts that silence will likely continue. Recent experience offers little reason to expect a detailed response. Yet this very silence explains why such letters multiply. When official channels do not resolve doubts, the doubts do not disappear. They move outward. They circulate among the faithful. For many Catholics watching these developments, the issue is not about winning arguments. It is about identity. They grew up with a clear understanding of certain doctrines and moral teachings. They now encounter language that feels provisional or open-ended. They hear strong pronouncements on social and political matters, while theological disputes linger unresolved. The contrast unsettles them. The role of the Holy See in global affairs adds another layer. Over decades, the Vatican has cultivated relationships with governments and international institutions. This diplomacy has often been praised as a force for peace and humanitarian advocacy. Yet critics worry that proximity to global political structures influences priorities and language. They ask whether the Church can maintain prophetic distance while also pursuing collaboration. Behind all these arguments lies a simple but heavy question: who speaks for the faith received from previous generations? For some, the current leadership, including Pope Francis, is guiding the Church through necessary adaptation. For others, adaptation has crossed into accommodation. The division is not total. Many Catholics remain loyal to the Pope while still desiring clearer doctrinal boundaries. Others feel forced to choose between obedience and conscience, even though they do not want that choice. The emotional weight of this tension is visible in the tone of letters like the one addressed to Cardinal Fernandez. They are not written lightly. The recurring theme is clarity. The writers do not claim to judge intentions. They focus on effects. They see confusion among ordinary believers. They see debates that were once confined to academic circles spilling into parishes. They see trust eroding. In their view, the letters are not the problem. They are symptoms. They measure a spiritual temperature. When dialogue at higher levels appears stalled, questions resurface from below. And they return persistently because they are not theoretical. They touch how people pray, confess, marry, baptize their children, and understand salvation. Whether these appeals will be answered remains uncertain. What is certain is that they reflect a genuine unease. The faithful who write them insist that they remain within the Church. They continue to attend Mass, receive the sacraments when available, and profess the Creed. But they no longer recognize the tone of governance as fully aligned with the faith they were taught. That tension defines the present moment. It is not a formal schism. It is not open rebellion. It is a struggle over language, priorities, and trust. And until those questions are addressed directly, the letters will keep coming. They rise not from hostility but from conviction. They are the voice of believers who feel responsible for what they have received and uncertain about where it is heading. If this message touched your heart, like this video and share your thoughts in the comment Amen and stay with us. More Eucharistic stories, deeper reflections, and holy insights are on the way. May Christ in the Eucharist be your light, your rest, your truth. Amen.